So, not easy to be the last panel, that's for sure. I think I want to spend quality time with the panelists who are doing amazing work in the public sector. As we get, and we've had some fantastic conversations over time in the last few weeks, and I think there's a lot of interesting material that we're going to be sharing. But today I want to celebrate some advances, because as I walked into the afternoon, I realized all the ladies were wearing skirts. And there are many ladies in the audience. So perhaps what I really want to celebrate is that we have the first woman nominated by a major party in the United States of America. So, having just spent time with her last week, I could tell you she is really an amazing person. But I also have to honor, in terms of diversity, the 8 years of our incredible president, President Obama. So, Barbara and Kona, we've made a lot of progress, certainly in the last 30 years. I had to go to my first meetings, not only on job sites, but with clients in a suit, black suit or blue suit, so that there would be no question that I had something to offer and that I had knowledge that others didn't have. So I think we've made progress. And then just because I think, and Julie's still here, I'm going to give a little competition to her band. And because there are a lot of the women who I'm going to be putting on my band are not here, it's going to be a mix, sort of, there are going to be boys and girls in my band. And it's going to be called La Pura Vida, La Vida Rica. And what that means is pure life and delicious life. So you can all question what delicious really means. Is it resilient or what is it? But that's what it's going to be. And it's going to be an amazing band, I'm going to tell you. And, aside from that, I think there's going to be some conversations with in about December with the first woman president. And we're going to have some czars in this administration. And there's going to be an environmental czar. And there's going to be a design czar, which I'm confused because Martha used to always advocate for having a design czar in the United States of America, and I've got to make her the environmental czar. So I'm a little confused on how I'm going to go about this, but I could tell you that all the people up here who are going to be sharing their experience in the public realm, I'm going to have to decide what they want to be. And so we're going to have these continual conversations, and we're going to definitely consult with LAF and ASLA on how to get our agenda moved forward. So with that, good afternoon. So the question is at hand is how will our new declaration serve our reality today? And as we've heard in yesterday's presentation, our profession grapples with the most pressing issues of our time in creative and innovative ways. Some of the themes that emerged yesterday, and we've heard this on and a lot, are humanism, advocacy, urbanism, ecology, integrated design, interdependence, multidisciplinary action, communication, and I would add also empathy. Ours is a broad practice with many meaningful ways to contribute to society and nature. If there's something we do that truly sets us apart from allied professions, it is that we are connected discipline that solves complex problems at varying scales. Ours is a profession with great potential to impact human and ecological health and well-being. And is the green what I push, or what do I push here? Green, green, green. Okay. This panel looks at our profession through the lens of public practice. Our panelists work at the intersection of people, place, and policy, making our communities healthier and more livable. If we look at landscape architecture as having three realms, projects, programs, and policies, it is the built projects that get the most recognition in our field. These are most often designed by people working in the private realm. Those working in the public realm, whether developing programs, changing policies, or serving in public office, may feel disconnected from those who call themselves landscape architects. And yet, our public practitioners are at the forefront of emerging research, urban transformation, groundbreaking policies, and communication with the public. In addition, they often serve as curators, collaborating with practitioners to deliver projects. Our panelists here are infiltrating organizations that many of us have as clients and are elevating the discussion around landscape architecture. They are basically defending us, expanding our roles, and raising the bar of the work that's being produced. Each of our panelists bring an important perspective on the present and future practice of landscape architecture and landscape architecture training while operating in the issues of the built environment. So with that, we're going to start our round, and perhaps one of the first questions to Christian, Deborah, and Nette. We talked a lot about values and cultural values, and sort of we're going to have images circulating of the work that these wonderful people are all sort of advocating and getting built or putting forward. Given this, can you each one of you share your thoughts about cultural values, and so how much they impact potentially the declaration or the work that you feel needs to happen?
Okay, I'll start. So I was interested to hear Mark's conversation about doctors and how doctors work and the different kind of flavors of practicing medicine. I started my career as an attorney and practiced for 3 years before I went back to school to study landscape architecture. And I can tell you that there are gatherings of attorneys, but there wouldn't have been a gathering like this one where everyone present is trying and putting their heart forward to say, how can we make the world a better place in the various ways that we do it? And that to me is, I'm very honored to be part of this group. And I think as a group we should recognize that how we feel about the earth and what our responsibility to it is not consistent across all professions. So that said, I think we understand what our utility in the world is, but many others have said this yesterday and today. The broader world doesn't. We don't, I think, need to get, yes, we should strive for excellence in our profession, but as Jim Corner said yesterday, we already know that the ultimate goal is to reduce joy and to a connection to nature and social spaces where we can connect with one another. So how are we going to drive resources, and we'll get to money, right? Because I feel like I want to talk about money in this conversation. But from my perspective, it's about sending us out into the world to be leaders, to change the broader values of the culture, not our values. Our values are where they should be, I believe, and that's what I've been hearing for 2 days. But the broader culture, as many have said, doesn't really understand what it is that we do. And I think we can do that by taking our perspective and becoming the client, by becoming the developer, by becoming the nonprofit leader, by becoming the mayor. And by leading, we can change the broader values to create a kind of conceptual and ideological framework for the work that we can deliver already.
So to build off of what Deborah was saying, I think that when we think about the values that we can provide, when we think about what drove us all to this practice, and I think in many cases, if we think back, we've all had transformative experiences in nature. As children, I think that, the sort of cries to save rainforests and whales of my childhood wouldn't have resonated with me if I hadn't grown up playing in the woods. And so the power of our profession is to not just advocate for these large global scale issues like climate change, but to actually create places of experience that stick with people for their lifetime, because that's how you create a population who cares about these bigger picture issues. If you don't have that foundation of person-to-person individual experience and that transformative experience, you're not going to translate to an adult who votes on these issues, who wants to fund these issues. And I think when we talk about the importance of expanding our profession, if we focus more on convincing the public in the day-to-day places and the quality of life that they experience through our work, we'll drive enough people to this profession just as an offshoot of that effort. I think our biggest focus here is really to improve the quality of life for the public, and that's the core of what public practice is.
I love that Mia used the term infiltration, because I guess we're just a bunch of insurgents up here, malcontents in some way. My mother would be probably aghast, but I guess something that drove me into my current role, and what I think all of us kind of really strive for is, and I think we've heard it over the course of the last 2 days, is really how to increase opportunity and really create space for landscape architecture. I mean, I think within the academy defines landscape architecture with beautiful articulation very clearly. But I oftentimes in the actual practice of landscape architecture, I believe we're allowing others to define that for ourselves as a profession. So I think to the degree that we actually move into roles of greater authority and really reclaim that word of landscape, I know it's got a lot of elasticity and people kind of can appropriate it, and the term metaphor has been thrown around, but really kind of reclaim it and kind of move beyond the boundaries of park design and start thinking into kind of the more aggregate components of what is planning and design and construction, and how can we actually affect that change in actionable, measurable, proactive ways. I think Carl Stein had said sometimes we'll lead, sometimes we'll follow. And I think the reality is we can really affect change in any number of ways, whether it's mechanisms through policies, whether it's measurable project level results, whether it's the landscape analytics and really looking at kind of how data really informs process, so knowledge-based design and decision-making really starts factoring into the discussion.
So Christian, what is your title now, just so that in case people forgot to look at the...
I work for the General Services Administration in Washington, D.C., and it sounds very general. The General Services Administration, I came out of private practice with Ken Smith originally, and then Thomas Balsley Associates. In the General Services Administration, they're very well known. We own and operate over 9,000 properties. We own everything from the White House to your federal courthouse to all the land ports of entry in the country to laboratories for NASA.
And what about the bees? What do you do for the bees?
That's part of the policy. Bees and trees. You just have to accept it. That's how people kind of.
But that was what the president was signing, right?
That's
I was
right.
so impressed.
The declaration here. I mean, policy really is a mechanism and a vehicle to deliver action as a proxy across projects that you can't always be in attendance for at every little decision and meeting. And in June of 2014, we worked very closely with the president and the Executive Office of Environmental Quality to really develop a proactive engagement of pollinators. It sounds so esoteric and so soft in that kind of big policy discussion, but the reality is it means about $20 billion to the US economy and puts 40% of food in people's mouths, animal pollination. These are things that once they get kind of recaptured and reconceptualized into that mantra of ecosystem services, that immediately connects us to our allied professionals, but also allows us to somehow be differentiated and gives us room to bring delight to projects. And that it's I think, an inevitability that's where our greatest future and capacity is.
So, and mayor, because once a mayor, always a mayor, even though you're now on, so the mayor of San Antonio, and now on the school board. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how your landscape architecture training has influenced some of the work. You had a wonderful story yesterday about the school, the school projects.
Well, thank you. It's certainly a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share my trajectory and first I just want to share my story to Texas A&M University in the design studio there in landscape architecture, because I really didn't know what landscape architecture was until my sophomore year at the University of Texas at Austin, where I was still discovering what major I wanted to land in after changing 5 different times my first 2 years out of high school. But I really attribute the visionary builders, the landscape architects, the planners of the 1920s that built the neighborhood I grew up in as a big influence of my trajectory, and to my parents, 3rd generation Hispanic Americans, Tejano Americans, choosing to live in such a diverse, wonderful community that had so much detail in its landscape and its architecture that had a powerful influence, and the people, having next door neighbors that had a beautiful landscape yard that kind of got my curiosity and encouraged me to be creative in my own backyard. Those were the seeds that were planted. And I think my desire to go into public policy and as an elected servant came from that same foundation. The neighborhood I grew up in, ironically, had deed restrictions up until the 1940s or 50s, where Negroes or Mexican Americans could not buy in that particular neighborhood. So it was built, this neighborhood was built for the business and elite in San Antonio. Today I sit on the school board, and that same community and schools are 98% Hispanic. The public schools are primarily disadvantaged, at-risk students, but yet the wonderful architecture, the wonderful neighborhood, the park, the landscape is all still part of the fabric, and part of my motivation to stay involved in public service is so that future generations can also have that same kind of calling, same kind of experience that was inspired based on the built environment. And that was what led me eventually to find landscape architecture. I never did take the licensing exam, so I was often nervous to say I was a landscape architect, but it is part of my problem-solving approach, whether it's in public service, in the schools, city council, or as mayor of San Antonio.
Great. So, Mark, you have had an interesting trajectory yourself, and you were the president of the ASLA, and so obviously you've volunteered a lot of your time to this profession. Talk a little bit about, and you were also the head of the Recreation and Parks Department in this fair city, so right. You're leaving quite a legacy, as we have all witnessed. Maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of how you see getting other people engaged in public practice and alternative modes of sort of practicing the profession.
Certainly, and want to start off by, it's a little late, but welcoming everyone to Philadelphia, my hometown. I love it here. It's interesting because I think, and I talked about this a lot when I was president of ASLA, I think landscape architects are just inherently wired to work in the public sector. Everything in our education, our training, our practice is about collaboration. It's about building consensus. We know land, we know the environment, we know people, we know design. I mean, we just know these things. And so whenever I talk to students or young practitioners trying to get them to think about public sector, that's kind of the hook I use. I say, come on, you can inherently do this. It may not be as familiar to you as working in the private sector, because again, 80% of our profession works in the private sector, but you can do this. And I also like to say that I think that, and I think the 5 of us are examples of this, we're small in number, but we're mighty. When you get into a position of working in the public sector, you really can influence policy, practice, the end result, the design product at GSA, at Philadelphia Parks in New York. I mean, this is what we do. I think one of the challenges to it is that inherently landscape architects are modest. And I think Joe said it on the last panel, you know, landscape architects are good people and they all get along. And I think that's a little bit of a challenge. When I was president of ASLA, we did the whole new ad and public awareness campaign. And one of the things we joked about in-house was that landscape architects are inherently shade-loving species, which means, you know, we all love to do our good work, but we don't really like to take credit for it. So part of it is like pushing ourselves as individuals, as organizations out there. And I think so my challenge, and I hope this is reflected in the declaration, and it's my challenge to all audiences, to come out from under the shade and come into the sunlight and work in the public sector, really influence policy, practice, the finished product, and really, you know, kind of use what we are inherently wired and trained to do to help benefit the environment and communities.
I think for Nette and Deborah, what are the biggest challenges you have in the nonprofit sector in terms of effectuating the projects that you need, that you want to put forward to communities? And what is it that you think in hiring young landscape architects or designers? What are some of the suggestions you might have in academia in terms of training and given the schools that they might have graduated from?
Yeah. We only have 15 minutes. I mean,
yes. Yes.
I mean, I think that there are, in a way, there are many challenges that can also be viewed as opportunities. I like to be an optimist about these things, but I think that nonprofits have an opportunity to fit in between the needs of a community and the capacity of government structure. And that interstitial space varies at different scales, it varies in different cities, but we can play a role of problem solver. And I think, again, what really, as Mark was saying, the skills of a landscape architect, of collaborator, of listener, of convener, and ultimately synthesizer of solutions enables us to identify what those opportunities are and to bring together a diverse suite of partners from the funding side, from the community side, from the government side, to actually bring projects to fruition. And there's a lot of opportunity there, but the challenge lies in that the need is so great and so multifaceted that it's difficult to focus in and really bring a project to a finished state. These are long-term investments.
So they're diplomats and you're infiltrators. No. So what are the challenges? And you had mentioned some funding challenges.
So I think, so my organization, New York Restoration Project, we work on both managing and creating open spaces in low-income communities. So our challenges are twofold. One is a resource challenge in that, you know, there are, at least in New York, I struggle to speak to other cities, but I know in New York, there's a kind of developing model of private dollars going to certain spaces, but they don't typically flow to low-income spaces. So how to resource those spaces properly is a challenge. The other challenge is that our cities are organized according to a kind of 19th century model of core competencies. You have transportation, you have parks, you have the water systems, and they each have purview over different parts of the land. When we look at the land from the point of view of we work citywide, we're looking at it from the user point of view, and very rarely does the user point of view dovetail and overlap perfectly with the jurisdictions that define how the land should be used. So, for example, just a quick story about money and jurisdiction. We are seeking city funding to build what will be the first waterfront access in the South Bronx, in the poorest congressional district in the country. And we have told our city leaders that for $3 million, we'll raise the balance, which would be bring it to $15 million. But and this is a site that belongs to our Department of Transportation, so it's not already a park site. We have struggled because there's a kind of chicken-egg problem in that, but it's not mapped to parkland already, and who will take ownership of it, and what will it be? And we couldn't even begin to touch that question of what could be allocated until like the proper bucket was created to allocate into. So it's both. It's money and it's bureaucracy. I don't know that we answered the question about students, but very quickly, we're vertically integrated, so our landscape architects on staff do engagement, they present to communities, they design for community, and then they work with our maintenance and operations staff to make sure that whatever we design is maintainable. So I would offer that I think students need to understand how to work on the edges of the profession, and then also if they're going to go into public work, they need to understand the regulatory frames, the political frames, the funding frames.
And I think just to add on to the sort of what should students focus on, I think thinking about your work through the evaluator of impact. So thinking about work, how you judge the success of your work should be on the impact of that work. And I think that that's a different value system than is often found both in schools and in our practice, but that's really where the work matters, it's where the work counts, and it's also how nonprofits and government are able to continue to expand the work that they do.
Yeah, I would add to that. We recently undertook an analytics program where essentially we're looking at, on this project right here, in fact, that Andrew Pogan designed for us with HOK and with Perkins and Will, where we essentially looked at this project with the University of Maryland, with LAF, and looked at all of the performance-related issues and gains with this project. It's so that we could quantify the gains in more than just nebulous terms, that this project here sequesters 24 times more carbon than the equivalent traditional spec office building site, that harbors 8 times much more biodiversity. These things that then our allied agencies, policy folks can then get behind and understand. It doesn't take the creative freedom away from the landscape architect. It actually creates a structure for which allows them to then do delightful work.
So I think in our conversations, Deborah, you and Nette, we talked a bit about how the quantitative factors are easier to quantify because it's quantitative, but the qualitative factors, what it does to your soul, and the fact that there's metrics, of course, where there are trees and wonderful projects, already the results have been that, there's less crime, and any words of wisdom on how some of the qualitative sort of results of your projects could be sort of presented for funding?
Go ahead, yeah.
I think that qualitative measures are sticky, and that's not specific to our field at all, but because they're difficult, it doesn't mean they should be ignored. I think that when we think about how to look at the impact of landscape on a community, on a neighborhood scale, there's a lot of opportunity to explore and expand how we're doing that in a very scientific way and scientific methods, and there's great models to follow out there. But when it comes to convincing elected officials, when it comes to convincing funders, I think it really is about telling stories. And we sometimes rely a little bit too much on like X number of gallons of water captured or cool graphic charts. And frankly, that it does not stir the heart of people. And when you're trying to motivate, be it a funder or a voter ballot initiative towards funding public space, telling stories really resonates with people. You see it in the way our politicians make cases. They identify an individual person and tell that person's story. They don't give you a bunch of wonky policy.
Right.
But you need the quantitative too, right?
Yeah.
Because I have funders say to us, what's your ROI? We build this new space in a low-income community. Like, I'd like to fund you. I believe it's nice for people to be able to go outside, but what's your return? And so we have started saying to funders, we're going to use 10 to 15% of the budget for evaluation, And we'll ask, if you entered this space, did you meet a neighbor? Are we trying to get at, did we build social capital, as well as measuring ecosystem services? Because the design and construction piece, the capital work, where most of our work is situated, is just a small part of the lifespan of a public space.
So there's funding, and maybe for Ed, Mark, and you, Christian. There was talk yesterday about the 300. I don't know. I think it was B. Nothing is in M's anymore. It's either B's or T's, right? Billions or trillions of dollars that gonna probably surface for infrastructure projects, and how important it's going to be for us to be able to sort of figure out how to get green infrastructure and other projects built. Have you worked on that? You have some thoughts? Is there some successes you want to share about some funding that has been parlayed into other funding, or sort of in a creative way?
Well, I think anytime it comes to funding, it really comes from two sides: the grassroots support for a project for green architecture, green landscape architecture, sustainable architecture, and the policymakers. And having been mayor, being able to use the bully pulpit to say we're going to have balanced growth in San Antonio and run on that initiative citywide and get elected on that mandate is powerful. But then you run into the realities, as was said on the previous panel, from the financial institutions, the developers, other stakeholders that would put up roadblocks. And that's something we all have to ask: who is against us in this declaration? Who are we? Why shouldn't it just happen? And what are their thinking? And what is their justification? And so from the call to action, I think we need more landscape architects to be in the position of elected office, whether it's school board, city council, mayor, all the way up through the federal level. If everyone in here ran for office, or had a spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend that ran for office, you would begin to see that side of the table advocate for better projects. But it has to be supported on the grassroots side. People need to be educated, as well as the leadership part. And I had some images of leadership education on the school board. One of the programs that I'm a big advocate for is International Baccalaureate, which is a global program, because we have to get in the minds of the youth today so that it becomes a natural cultural evolution of our environment.
Did you want to say something, Mark?
I do think I wanted to support something Ed was saying, but expand it a little bit. I think everyone in this audience and in this profession, if we really want to implement the landscape architecture that we see in the future, we have to place ourselves in the political realm. It's something that's uncomfortable to most people, but we have to do it. I mean, we talk about over the last 2 days, we've talked about the magnitude of what we're confronting as a society, as a world, as a profession. Yeah. And the way we're going to effectuate change is to place ourselves in the political structure. We may not like the political structure, but that's what we have. That's the hand we've been dealt.
So what are you running for?
So, well, I'm not running for anything, but I do think...
Major announcement,
No,
you
major
guys.
announcement here, no.
Declaration.
No.
You're going to
make my own
talk to
declaration.
Hillary about that.
But I think that, Ed being mayor and city council and school board, I mean, we position ourselves, you start small, your zoning commission, your shade tree commission, but start somewhere and become a landscape architect that's in the public realm, representing the broader good. Educate everyone you know. We were having some sidebar conversations yesterday. Christian shared 2 situations he was in. And if you look at it as a glass half full situation, thank goodness Christian was there as a landscape architect to bring our voice to those conversations. So we all need to position ourselves, because then we set policy. Resources today are being driven at the local level. Most innovation is happening at the local level, sadly not the state or the federal.
And I would say 2 other things, and one is that being members of boards of nonprofits like the Trust for Public Land, like Tree People, like the Nature Conservancy, also has tremendous value. So anybody who thinks they're going to have some live-work balance, they probably should put that to sleep until we solve the problems we have to sleep.
Of the world, right.
I just want to point out also, all 3 of the offices that I've held elected were non-paid positions. So I kept one foot in the private side, whether it was in landscape architecture or land development, which was my master's degree, but I had supportive employers that would support my advocacy for this passion and commitment.
So in fairness to the people in the audience, so we have some questions, and we'll take some turns answering them. Public practice in politics. What happens when your beliefs don't align at all with the people in charge?
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Just don't give up. Just keep working within the systems. Keep working with people. Help them understand different views. It's, again, this is where landscape architecture is just structured great to do that.
And I would add, as someone who's been doing more and more research on toddler management lately, is to think about how do you see things at the level of the person who you don't agree with, you don't agree with. So, you know. So I was just thinking about, okay, so if a toddler's throwing a tantrum, what they tell you to do is to repeat back the toddler saying they're upset about, like, I didn't get ice cream. You say, I understand that you didn't get ice cream. I'm sorry you didn't get ice cream. And then the key is to empathize with what the challenges that they're dealing with. Yeah. So if you have a politician people in charge who you disagree with, find out what it is that they're trying to achieve. Try to find out what problems they're trying to solve, and then show them how what you have to offer is addressing those issues.
That's right, because as Ed said, people aren't in politics for money. I mean, if they're not crooked, they're not in politics for money. But the thing is, you can count on that somewhere in that person who's in politics, even if you don't align exactly with their politics, there is a genuine desire in there to do the best for the people of that municipality. And you just have to figure out what it is, and then kind of appeal to that. And I think the toddler in this context is not a bad analogy.
Well, wonderful.
So, Christian, how can we make public practice appear more robust and attractive to young professionals?
Haven't we already done that?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just a design public perception issue, and I think that's disseminating. But to pick up on what the conversation was just happening here, I think in many ways, people need to just learn how to code switch a little bit and understand that in the realm of the political discussion, just like when we all went into design school, you didn't have the jargon, you didn't have the ability to kind of contextualize the business case for what it is. But the beauty of what we do and in that mantra of ecosystem services is there's an inevitability. The logic is so beautiful, but you do have to get creative about how you capture it and get other people interested in what you are espousing. And there's an art to that. There's no clear path. It's about relationship building and other aspects.
About images, and we heard some poetry today. I mean, there's so many ways to convey. P22 lives in Southern California, and I was so happy that Nina Marie shared with him. We're having an event where we're walking with a photograph of P22 to sort of highlight the problem that he has about getting across freeways. So that's happening on October 22nd. Anybody wants to walk 15 miles in the mountains, they're welcome.
Mia, just one more thing about the young professionals. Something that I think young professionals should find very attractive is that if you work with any of the institutions that we are leading, you can do a lot at a very early stage.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about GSA, but I know at Trust for Public Land and other places, young landscape architects who work at New York Restoration Project, they're meeting with the community, they're doing schematics, they're doing the full drawing set, they're overseeing construction, like 5 years in, they're building their own landscapes. So that's appealing.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is, it's really important. These people are in the conventional public practice, if one could call it that. But an office like mine, which yes, is not completely, it has two nonprofits that it's sort of spurned off. One is Grown in LA, which is a nursery practice to grow native plants for Southern California, for the LA area. And the other is a sort of a tactical urbanism practice, LA Moss. So, you're not always profitable when you're supposed to be profitable, and you just have to have the right team. And about 7 of them are here today. So one could say that they understand, and that's about values. We all understand that it impacts the bottom line. And we do research and we accept students during the summers, and we do different kinds of work.
I just wanted to make one more point. The number was 15,000 landscape architects. I don't even know if I'm one of the 15,000. But when you think about, we have 20,000 incorporated cities in the United States. 20,000 incorporated cities, not even rural areas. 20,000 incorporated cities, I would dare to say at least 60, 70% do not have a landscape architect that live in their communities. And so if we're going to transform, if we're going to become the change agent and the leader, then we have to grow the young professionals. We have to reach out into the schools to educate why this is important. And that's the way that we're going to be able to accomplish the declarations in order to really have the impact, because that's just too many communities that do not have voices for these important policy issues. And that's why it's going to take everybody in this room to take that call to action seriously and not just take it back. I equate private practice to, and now as a school board member, private practice to private schools. And you have a certain amount of control of the quality, and you're going to get things done. Then we have our public schools that are the vast majority of people. And that's where I think the role of all of us fill in that critical role of all of those communities and all those places that don't have an advocate and don't have any means to have this type of discussion or demand.
So how can we effectively implement, how can we more effectively implement adaptation policies? Policies become projects, lots of them. Too many guidelines, documents sit on the shelf. What do you say?
I say we have, I think landscape architecture as a field needs to connect more with actually what's happening in the policy realm in reality. I mean, if I were on the sideline of policy and I saw these last 2 days, I would think that our field died in 1967 or something. The reality is that there has been a tremendous number of policies that have come out. I mean, it's kind of what separates in many ways developing design and construction capital projects in the public realm is you marry aspiration with best in practice. We are going further. It's what makes it intriguing. So I think the reality is, I think there needs to be a greater awareness essentially of what is already being set, what is being established, and how to translate that into your private client practices.
Mark?
I would add to that working in the local public sector, if you have a leadership role, it's just your job to say, okay, we've studied this enough, let's do something. There are places that I could point to in Philadelphia where we have 4, 5, 6 studies that were done of this area, and in some cases I finally said, enough, let's put a shovel in the ground, get the community involved, let's improve this place, because yes, you could continue studying it, but there needs to be, someone eventually needs to say pencils down and let's do something.
Tactical urbanism can be very handy in that situation. Just do something right away.
Right.
Cheap, fast, get it out.
So basically, less is more and more is more. Is that kind of the thing? And you wanted to say something. I'm going to actually hand over my 2 minutes of wrap up so that we can continue answering questions. Is that fair? So Nette?
I think just to the point of often guidelines sit on the shelf because they don't have a champion. And so when we, private firm may do a master plan for a city, but it's actually having people working at all those levels of government, continuing to advocate for that change, to say, we've thought about this is what we should be doing. And so and again, this kind of gets back to how can we make this sexy and appealing to young professionals. You have a seat at that table. If you're in the government structure, you have an advocacy position that you can continue to push progress being made. And as we've said, that's happening at the local level. Innovation's happening at the local level, and progress is happening at the local level.
So I think what I will say is that it's up to LAF and all the students and also the Olmsted scholars to actually get their action sort of hats going and get organized so they can start doing what many of the sort of new elected officials, the way they use technology to get the message out and actually start really becoming more active. That space, that we care about design, and beautiful space, so elevates our spirit, but more is more, and the more spaces that sometimes are temporary are really important in terms of driving not only the health of communities, but also the opportunity that it might touch people to become engaged and interested in landscape architecture. As a commissioner in public service, how do you stimulate excellent landscape architecture?
You just demand it. I mean, I'm not, you basically say, this is what I find acceptable. I mean, I'm reviewing plans all the time, meeting with consultants, looking at materials, and I really believe in a public sector organization. The organization needs to respect the public by giving them the highest quality public space we can. And I've often said I'd much rather spend more money in a smaller space than less money in a bigger space. So you just demand it.
And I think also both within the nonprofit realm and the government realm that we need to demand excellence in our most underserved communities more.
Yes.
I think that there's sometimes a sense of, But I think sometimes it's a sense of like, oh, well, this tactical thing, or throw up at one mural and we're kind of, it's better than it was, kind of a sense. But I think the reality is that these are the communities that intervention will be most transformative. And so we need to be investing in those spaces and demand excellence in those spaces more than any other work that we're doing.
Great, okay. So it's about environmental justice in social justice, and really investing in our communities at all levels. And so with that, I think, I don't know why I have another minute. Do we want?
Barbara's behind you.
Yeah.
Oh, Barbara.
Your time is up, sadly.
Ah, okay.
You're gonna stay here? No, stay here. Thank you so much.